Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today I've put together one of the ogres from this month's Near Future Drop Troops, which are available from the Anvil Industry Digital Forge. Now if you cruise along to Patreon, I'll include a link in the description below. You can pick up these files and print them at home this month. These will become available for sale later on, so if you do miss out, you're watching in November or whenever, not to worry, you'll be able to pick up those STLs. Now this came off of a home machine, so that's printed on my Elegoo Mars, and I think that does the job just fine. This is inspired, you're going to hear me say XCOM and Mech Trooper a lot. I've seen people look at doing conversions with this having sort of a gorilla head for folks who are into Overwatch. You want to make Winston, well, here's where you might start. So let's get into an assembly and paint video. I'll list all of the paints used in the description below, but this time they're not so important. It's really more about the technique and, honestly today, just having some fun. So follow along if you like. Let's get started. Now because this has come off of a home printer, you'll find that there are a few little bits which have still got some of your support structure left behind. It's inevitable that you're going to get just a little bit of that. Now I'd suggest one thing that I thoroughly recommend getting: pick yourself up an ultrasonic cleaner. I didn't think much of this at first. I'd been sort of rinsing my stuff off the normal way and soaking it in IPA or water or whatever the material demands. But I then switched. I got some, this is water washable resin rather, and I got a, an ultrasonic cleaner. And the quality of my prints has just skyrocketed. Like the finished product there, you're looking at getting that from, well, anywhere that does its own resins, let's say. And one of the other cool things about having the ultrasonic is that it actually weakens the support structure's joints. So when you come time to actually do your cleanup, you'll find that there's far less left behind on the model when you come to drag those supports off. So I'm going to go around now. I've got my little emery board, and I'm just going to smooth out all of those bits, which has just got some bubbles left over from the printing. Now the kit itself, it does come with this kind of canopy looking thing. There's two versions of this. You can either print a closed or an open one, but the body itself has this socket in the top, and you can fit any old head in there. So for example, I've actually got one of the heads. This is for the character that comes with this month's pack. I'm actually just going to put that in there, when we glue it down that is, and I'm going to make a Mech Trooper. I've got the XCOM vibe, so let's play into that. When it comes to glue this bad boy together, the left and right legs are pretty obvious, but the arms themselves are actually marked left and right, which is really handy, funnily enough. You can give this a really sort of stooped, hunched over pose, but I want mine to stand up a bit. Oops. Let me just make sure I've got that at the right angle. And we'll give that a few seconds to dry and pop on a second leg. But while the other leg isn't glued, you can sort of use it to wiggle against the base that I'm going to put on him, just to make sure that he is standing up correctly. Or if you really trust your glue, you can glue down the first leg itself, and then while that's fixed to the base, you can move the other leg around to even pose it if you'd like. I'm not 100% certain that my glue's up to that task though, so I'm just going to glue this together normally. Now while that's drying, we'll put that aside and we can get on to assembling the gun arms. Now these are actually marked. You might even see that. That's marked right. So when you print that, you can't really mess them up. Now this part here on the gun arm, these are its sort of clawed fingers, and we want to match it up against this flat part here. So you'll see that it fits flush against that. Well, once you've not got your fingers and camera in the way, it will. I'm going to go ahead and glue that now. Now, to show you this properly, I'd probably need 3 hands. But what we're going to do is dry fit in the left arm first. So his left, not ours. And we'll get the other arm. Okay, I can actually show you this. And you start just kind of getting a feel for where those are going to need to sit. So let's push the left arm in a little bit until that wrist joint sits flush like the other hand. So you might need to play around with this. Luckily, the resin will normally sort of catch and hold So that's something. But I'm going to do this properly off camera, just to give you the idea. Do dry fit your stuff before you start gluing, okay? Now once that glue's had a couple of minutes to set, you can actually glue your gun barrel in. Now this will require a little bit of tweaking, and when you look at the supports that come pre-supported, this will have a long pin in the bottom. You want to trim some of that off so that it will actually fit in place, but I'm going to glue that in now. So at this stage, it's time to make a choice about how you want the head to look. You can fit the canopy and glue that on closed if you'd like. I think a little bit more careful fitting that would look a bit nicer, but I want to play around. I'm going to put that head in there that I showed you. As well, you can fit just about any head in there, so if you've got, say, the automata parts, which just went live on the store, you can go ahead and make yourself the Wheatley Laboratories sort of armed turret thing going on there. But that's up to you. You can choose whatever you want. I'm going to glue in that fella's head, make our mech trooper. And now finally assembled, we can get on to painting him. I'm going to hit this fella with a primer of gunmetal from the Army Painter, and we'll give that a couple of minutes to dry, come back and get started. Now this has come out quite a lot more shiny than I was expecting. Conditions today really aren't ideal for spray priming, which I knew, and I did this anyway, so whoops, the benefit of hindsight. But we're going to do plenty to this anyway, so I reckon we'll give it a shot. We'll see what we get over the top of this. Pretty sure we can salvage it. I'm going to start off the way I always paint big areas of metal. I've got some Nuln Oil, big old brush, and we'll just coat the whole bleeding model. Okay, make sure that you are working into any recesses, because it's going to be important for that shading and what have you. And then give this plenty of time to dry. Now that's come out way better than I was expecting. I was almost prepared to toss this in the bin and start over, but you know, stick with it sometimes and you'll find that you do end up with something pretty cool. What we'll do now, I won't bother showing you this on camera, we'll just grab some Agrax Earthshade and do exactly the same thing again. So bucket this stuff on, over the top, and away we go. We'll let that dry too. And what you'll end up with is something super dark, but you'll notice that it doesn't look as brown as when we apply that Agrax Earthshade. It actually looks sort of a more brown-black. I mean, that's exactly what we're going for, I guess. But it will not look as brown as you might be worried about. What we want to do now is introduce a bit more shine. We want to get the edges of some of these metal areas and make them pop a little bit. So I'm getting out of the pot here some Necron Compound and just popping that on a bit of kitchen towel. Then what I'm going to do is get the biggest, the biggest makeup brush I own. Now, why makeup brushes? These are actually really soft, which when you're trying to achieve sort of a softer, more subtle dry brushing effect, a makeup brush is ideal for that. And secondly, it looks super funny. So what we'll do is once you've worked some Necron Compound into your brush, just lightly flick along the edges. Probably helps if I do this where you can see it. But you'll see very quickly we start getting a nice sharp silver edge to some of these areas. So what I'm going to do is go around the whole model. I'm not particularly worried if I hit his face or the edges of these armor plates or wherever. We're just going to dry brush the whole thing and add a bit of shine back to this very dark metal. So take your time, do as much of this as you like. I'm going to probably go quite overboard with this, to be honest. I like a slightly shinier finish. We'll come back and look at that when we're finished. As you can see, that's a fairly nice metallic finish. Nice and burnished, but without being really dirty. Very easy to do. What we want now is some colour on some of these armor plates, though. So we'll pick out a couple like his shoulder pad here. You can paint as much or as few of these as you like. I'm using this as yellow-green from VALLEJO. This one is great if you're painting, say, Deutsche Afrika Korps or giant robots. Your call. What I'm going to do is just pick out a few of these panels and paint over a layer of this yellow-green. We'll come back and get a look at that. Shall I paint in the chest piece? Yeah, we'll paint in that bit. Avoid those metal bits. Yeah, we'll come back and get a look at that when that's finished. Now this is going to need 2 coats in most places. On the back of his shoulder plates, for example, I actually came back and gave those a third coat just to make sure that I had a nice solid colour. What we'll do now, I've got some Athonian Camoshade. You could also use Military Shader from the Army Painter. All we're going to do is go over all of these armour plates. Reintroduce a bit of shading and dull down that sort of mustardy yellow colour a little bit. And give that about 10-20 minutes to dry. Now you'll see we're starting to come closer to that real world sort of modern military green, or olive, or yellow, whatever you want to call it. What I've got here, I actually lost my small dry brush, so I'm just using another makeup brush here, and I have some Underhive Ash. What we'll do is just very carefully pick out some areas to get a little bit of dry brushing. And you'll see we add a little bit of shape there to those contours. So take your time, build up that colour carefully, with a few passes over these areas, and you'll find that this is easier than doing it with the edge of a brush. So rather than painstakingly edge highlighting all of this, let's just get in there with a little dry brush. CITADEL small dry brush or similar will do the job as well, and we'll add some Underhive Ash to brighten this up a little. Now once we've got a bit more definition on that armour, we'll go into painting his head. And for this I'm going to paint this in the sort of, let's just say, default Games Workshop method. So I've got here my Bugman's Glow, and we'll just cover over all of his skin. Then we splash on a little Reikland Fleshshade. We're not too worried about his hair because we are going to touch that up a little bit later, but we'll get this on, get some detail in there. Now once that's dried, what we want to do is paint in most of the rest of his skin with Cadian Fleshtone and leave just a little bit in the recesses untouched. So his eye sockets, for example, under his cheekbones, we're going to paint most of this in, and we'll come back and get a look at what this looks like the old ear hole here. We won't paint that. Then finally, with a little Kislev flesh, we'll get in and highlight things like his eyebrows, tip of his nose, bottom lip and such. Now, this will look a little lopsided because, of course, on this fella he's got this metallic thing that we're going to paint in a little bit. But don't worry too much. If you find this difficult, you can skip most of this if you fancy. Now we'll fill in his hair, and I'm going to use just a little bit of Mahogany Brown. This is another VALLEJO colour. Of course, any old colour you fancy here will do the job. There are an awful lot of hair colours out there in the world. Just take your time. You'll find, in some cases, you're only going to need one coat of this, but I'll leave that to you to decide. Now I've got some Iron Hand steel. Any sort of gunmetal or whatever will work for this, but very carefully we're going to paint in that little thing he's got on his face. Take your time here, and if you do make any mistakes, you can tidy up with those base colours again. Now just before we shade his hair and that metal bit, I want to add a little bit more to the rest of the model. There are some other panels which I think would look better being not quite so flat metallic. So these doublers up here on his shoulders, for example, I've got here Basalt Grey. This is another VALLEJO colour. You may find that something like Mechanicus Standard Grey would work well in place of this. Probably helps if I hold it where you can see it. What I'll do is fill in just a couple of areas where I want a little bit more variety on the model. So these handles are probably a really good spot for this. Let's have them look mechanical, but painted with something. Yeah, that's going to look better. That looks way more interesting. What I'll do is give that a quick Nuln Oil, and we'll just darken some of those areas back down a little bit. Now to really finish him off, what I've got is some Balthasar Gold. This is a nice brassy sort of colour. What I'm going to do is just pick out a few little details. You know what, it's probably quicker if I just paint a straight line out of that. And we'll shade over that with some Agrax Earthshade. And where else? Where will look cool? Can't be these jump pack sort of looking things. We'll fill these in as well. You don't want to use much of this Balthasar gold because you'll very quickly introduce sort of chaos to the look. But once this is done, we'll give these an Agrax Earthshade. So once that's dry, as a final stage, I just got a little bit of white, did some squiggles in to represent sort of text on the model, and a little bit of red for these no-step markers. I'd thought just a little bit extra would help sell the look. So what I'm going to do now is grab some sand. Let's go ahead and base this fella. Get a look at what he looks like, all in context. And there we have it. Our Mech Trooper is complete. I've actually really enjoyed this, especially considering that I wasn't expecting it was going to come out right at all. I was perfectly honest when I thought I was going to have to toss that and start over, but a little perseverance, and I've got something which I think is going to look plenty cool on the table. Obviously, you could spend ages doing more to this guy, but I think for what I wanted him for, he'll do the job just fine. So it's worth pointing out, do cruise along and check out the Anvil Industry Digital Forge over on Patreon. I'll include the link down below, because if you were to go and pick up, an individual file like this, you're probably going to look at paying $10 to $15 just for, something about this size, whereas this month that's also included our whole infantry army that you can print at home. Now this fella is coming to resin, so if you don't have a 3D printer, time will come you'll be able to pick one up yourself and assemble them at home. So hopefully something was interesting to you there. As always, feel free to comment in the old box below. Very special thanks to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, and for all of the lovely patrons who help keep me ticking over in paint and glue, including producers Alan Nuttall, Ben Hicks, and Kyrie Crawford. So, one and all, thank you very much for your time, and you enjoy the rest of your day.